Imagine a crowded freeway at rush hour, horns blaring, billboards flashing, 1,000 conversations buzzing through your phone. And somewhere inside your skull, another noise, your own voice, chattering, replaying yesterday, planning tomorrow, doubting, arguing, narrating every move. We call it thinking, but Itzhak Bentov called it a prison. He believed that as long as the inner dialogue is loud, the present moment remains out of reach. Consciousness is consumed by noise, circling itself like a snake devouring its own tail. And the tragedy, he argued, is that most people will live their entire lives inside this endless commentary, without ever experiencing what it means to be truly here. Today, we are going to step into Bentov's world, a world where silence isn't absence, but access, where the body itself is a resonant instrument capable of tuning into states of awareness far beyond what we've been taught to expect, and where the key to awakening isn't effort or struggle, but rhythm, breath, and the courage to pause the chatter inside. The tyranny of noise. Modern American life is built on noise. The television hums in the background, the phone vibrates in our pocket, our minds scroll endlessly even when our hands stop. We multitask, we consume, we chase, and then we collapse at night into restless sleep. The culture tells us that noise is life, that silence is emptiness, awkwardness, even danger. A deep dinner feels uncomfortable. A phone left unanswered sparks anxiety. Many Americans confess they can't sit alone in a room without music or distraction. Bentov noticed this long before social media. In the 1970s, he warned that our addiction to mental chatter would keep us blind to the deeper rhythms of the body and consciousness. He described the mind as a kind of overactive announcer at a sports game, endlessly shouting play-by-play, never letting us actually feel the game itself. The result is disconnection from ourselves, from others, from the present. What happens when the chatter stops? Every so often, we glimpse what life feels like when the noise fades. In meditation, when the breath slows and the mind drops into stillness. In the half-dream state between waking and sleep, when awareness hovers like a feather over the void. In moments of awe, staring at the Grand Canyon or standing beneath a cathedral dome, when words fall away and only presence remains. Bentov argued that these moments aren't accidents. They're not hallucinations or the brain shutting down. They're glimpses of a deeper mechanism built into the human body. A mechanism that activates when the internal dialogue quiets, when the conscious mind finally lets go of its grip on control. He called it the Kundalini syndrome model, though what he meant by syndrome was not illness, but system. A natural oscillation of body and brain that occurs whenever consciousness slips past the usual boundaries of time. Most people experience it unconsciously in sleep. But if you remain aware, calm, observant, you catch a glimpse of something extraordinary. Some call it God. Some call it the void. Bentov called it mechanics. The mechanical mystery. Bentov was not a guru. He wasn't a robe-wearing mystic. He was a mechanical engineer, an inventor, a scientist who designed medical devices for the human heart. He built machines. He thought in terms of circuits, oscillations, resonance. And when he turned that same gaze inward, he saw not superstition, but structure. He realized that the body itself is a standing wave, a resonant chamber. The heart beats rhythmically. The brain hums with frequencies. The cerebrospinal fluid moves like a tide through the spine. And together, these rhythms can lock into harmony, creating what he described as a feedback loop, a pulse that carries consciousness out of linear time and into expanded states of awareness.
This, he believed, was the true meaning of Kundalini. Not a snake, not a fantasy, but the body's own capacity to tune itself like an instrument into higher states of coherence. And the first step? Silence. Not passive silence, but rhythmic stillness. Why Americans fear silence? To understand why this is radical, we have to understand American culture. From the earliest days, America has glorified action, the pioneer spirit, the Protestant work ethic, the hustle and grind. To pause is to fall behind. To sit in silence is to waste time. Productivity is the highest virtue. We measure our worth in output. How many hours, how many dollars, how many followers. And silence produces nothing measurable. So we label it laziness, avoidance, weakness. But Bentov argued the opposite. He claimed silence is the most productive state of all, because it allows the nervous system to synchronize, to heal, to open doors that endless action keeps shut. It's no coincidence that yoga and meditation exploded in the United States during the 1960s and 70s, right as consumer culture reached full throttle. Bentov was part of that wave, but unlike many, he didn't sell mysticism as exotic escape. He reframed it in the language of science, a language Americans could understand. The internal dialogue as static. Think of your brain as a radio. When the internal dialogue is constant, it's like static. 1,000 overlapping stations, none coming in clearly. You can hear bits of music, fragments of speech, but mostly it's noise. When the dialogue quiets, the signal strengthens. A single station comes through, coherent, resonant, powerful. Bentov believed that consciousness works the same way. Silence allows the body to become an antenna, tuning in to frequencies normally drowned out by static. Those frequencies are not metaphor, they are measurable oscillations of the brain, shifts in wave patterns that correspond to expanded awareness. Theta and gamma waves, for example, are often recorded during deep meditation and mystical experiences. Bentov predicted this decades ago, before neuroscience caught up. He described the process not as magic, but as mechanics. The whisper beneath the noise. Have you ever been lying in bed, body still, but mind strangely alive? Have you felt a warmth in your chest, a buzzing in your hands, a pressure behind your forehead? Most of us dismiss these sensations as random. Bentov insisted they are signals,
signs that the natural oscillation of Kundalini is stirring, that the system is waking up, waiting for our awareness. But the chatter of the internal dialogue drowns them out. The more we analyze, worry, plan, the less we notice. The voice in the head is like a spotlight turned inward, blinding us to the subtle glow around it.
To perceive the present consciously, he said, we must quiet the spotlight. Let the stage return to darkness. And in that darkness, another light appears. Softer, older, more real.
Psychologists now call it default mode network activity. Neuroscientists measure how much of our waking life is spent in self-referential thought, planning, regretting, narrating. Bentov emphasized rhythm. Not technique, not exotic mantras, but rhythm. Slow, steady breathing. Gentle body sway. Stillness that lets the natural oscillations rise. He noticed that when the body becomes still enough, it begins to sway almost imperceptibly, like a pendulum. This sway sends waves up the spine, into the brain, synchronizing the hemispheres. Over time, the chatter fades, the noise settles, and the deeper rhythm takes over. The key is not to force, but to allow. Just as you don't force a flower to bloom, you create the right conditions, and it opens on its own. A culture afraid of the void. Here lies the paradox. Americans crave altered states. We chase them through alcohol, drugs, adrenaline sports, entertainment binges. But we fear the simplest and most direct path, silence. Why? Because silence feels like death to the ego. When the inner dialogue quiets, the me that constantly narrates begins to dissolve. And in a culture built on self-branding, on ego projection, on personal identity as a commodity, the idea of letting it go is terrifying.
Bentov knew this. He wrote that many so-called Kundalini crises were simply the mind panicking as its grip loosened. The energy itself is not dangerous. It is our resistance that creates chaos. Everyday Americans and the whisper of awakening. Consider the Vietnam veteran who sits on his porch, rocking slowly, staring at the horizon. He says he feels a hum in his chest, a calm he can't explain. Or the single mother who finally collapses after putting her kids to bed, and for a few moments before sleep feels a warmth rising through her spine. Or the jazz musician, lost in improvisation, eyes closed, body swaying, who later says he felt like something bigger was playing through him. These are not exotic yogis. They are ordinary Americans. And Bentov would say they are all touching the same rhythm, the body's natural Kundalini oscillation. The tragedy, he argued, is that they don't recognize it. They dismiss it. They let the internal dialogue return, explaining it away. And so, the moment passes. The pendulum and the present. He imagined consciousness swinging in and out of physical reality with every oscillation. Most of the time, we're too busy thinking to notice. But when the chatter stops, we can catch the swing. That flicker of awareness that hovers between matter and non-matter, form and formlessness. This, he claimed, is the doorway to perceiving the present consciously.
The now is not a frozen point in time, but a rhythm. To live in the present is to swing with it, to resonate with the pulse of the universe. And the only way to do that is to quiet the internal dialogue. Closing of Part 1. So here is the first key Bentov left us. Silence is not emptiness, it is access. The American disease is noise. Endless consumption, endless chatter, endless distraction. The cure is not escape, not conquest, but quiet. A quiet so deep that the body's own rhythm begins to sing. Bentov believed that once this rhythm awakens, you stop being so easy to control. You stop chasing validation. You stop living in fear. Because you realize that presence, true presence, was always your birthright. But this is only the beginning. Silence is the first step, the clearing of the stage. The real mystery lies in what happens once the rhythm begins, once the heart, brain, and spine fall into coherence, once the pendulum swings in harmony. And that is where we go next. Cliffhanger for Part 2. What happens when a mechanical engineer takes this rhythm seriously? How did Itzhak Bentov map the invisible architecture of consciousness? And why did the CIA, of all institutions, come knocking on his door? Picture a man in his small Massachusetts workshop, surrounded by wires, magnets, and pieces of medical equipment. He isn't chanting mantras, wearing robes, or sitting cross-legged in a Himalayan cave. He is soldering, measuring, tinkering with prototypes. And yet this same man would produce ideas that would echo through yoga studios, meditation retreats, classified CIA documents, and even underground communities of mystics and seekers. His name was Itzhak ben Bentov, and he was not your typical spiritual figure. He was an inventor, a mechanical engineer, a man who built catheters and early heart monitoring devices. But he was also a seeker who looked inside the human body with the same curiosity he applied to machines. And what he found there was extraordinary. Bentov became one of the first to frame mystical awakening not as superstition, but as mechanics. He believed Kundalini was not a myth, but a measurable system of resonance within the body. And in doing so, he gave the modern world, and especially America, a bridge between science and spirit. From war to wonder. Bentov's story begins in Czechoslovakia in 1923. He grew up during one of Europe's most turbulent eras, Nazi occupation, World War II, violence that shattered families and identities. Like many Jewish refugees, he fled, searching for safety and a future. Eventually, he made his way to Israel, where his engineering skills found a home in the young nation's defense and medical industries. But he was restless. He wanted to explore, to build, to invent beyond the confines of military needs. So he moved again, this time to the United States. In America, Bentov reinvented himself as an engineer and medical inventor. He designed catheters, helped pioneer cardiac devices, and became known for turning simple household items into prototypes. In one famous story, he built an early heart monitoring machine using a salad bowl, magnets, and tape recorders. This was the man the medical community knew: practical, inventive, creative. But beneath the surface, another curiosity stirred. He wanted to know not only how the heart worked, but how consciousness itself functioned. The double life of an inventor. By day, Bentov worked on medical technology. By night, he meditated, read mystical texts, and explored the frontier of human consciousness. Friends described him as both childlike and brilliant, someone who could dive into complex equations, yet explain them with humor and simplicity. He was not dogmatic.
He wasn't trying to start a movement. He wanted to understand. Bentov began experimenting on himself, measuring subtle vibrations during meditation, mapping the body's responses. He noticed that when he sat completely still, his body wasn't perfectly frozen. It swayed, almost imperceptibly, like a pendulum. That sway sent pulses up the spine, through the cerebrospinal fluid, into the ventricles of the brain. And those pulses, he believed, began synchronizing the brain hemispheres, changing the very rhythm of thought. What yogis described as Kundalini rising, Bentov described as a mechanical oscillation system. Stalking the Wild Pendulum. In 1977, Bentov released his book, Stalking the Wild Pendulum, on the mechanics of consciousness. It was not a traditional science text. It was not a mystical scripture either. It was something in between, a cosmic transmission wrapped in the language of engineering. In the book, Bentov made a radical claim. Consciousness oscillates like a pendulum, moving in and out of physical reality. We are not fixed in time and space. With each moment, our awareness swings, partly in matter, partly in something beyond. Most of the time, we don't notice because the internal dialogue drowns it out. But in meditation, in sleep, in deep stillness, we can catch the swing. We can feel the oscillation. And when the swing becomes coherent, something astonishing happens. We begin to experience ourselves outside of linear time.
To mystics, this sounded like enlightenment. To engineers, it sounded impossible. To Bentov, it was simply mechanics. America meets the pendulum. The 1970s in America were ripe for Bentov's ideas. Yoga was no longer just an exotic import. It was in living rooms and college campuses. The human potential movement was blossoming, promising that consciousness itself could be expanded. The counterculture was searching for scientific validation of mystical experiences. Bentov's book landed in the middle of this cultural shift. It gave people permission to believe that their strange inner experiences, the hum in meditation, the flashes of light, the sense of floating, were not delusions. They were part of a measurable pattern. Bentov didn't dismiss spiritual traditions. On the contrary, he showed how Hindu, Taoist, Christian, and Sufi practices all described the same system, but in symbolic language. He translated those symbols into mechanics Americans could grasp: resonance, oscillation, entrainment. For a society hungry for proof, his words were revolutionary. The CIA comes knocking. But it wasn't just spiritual seekers who paid attention. In the heat of the Cold War, the CIA and US military were exploring unconventional research, remote viewing, consciousness projection, anything that might give an edge against the Soviets. Bentov's ideas caught their attention. His work was referenced in what later became known as the Gateway Process, a series of documents exploring how altered states of consciousness could be used for intelligence gathering. Bentov explained how rhythmic oscillations in the brain could lead to non-local awareness, the sense of being outside time and space. For intelligence agencies, this sounded like remote viewing. For Bentov, it was simply another application of the body's natural mechanics. To this day, those CIA documents are studied by researchers and conspiracy theorists alike, and Bentov's name is there, bridging the gap between meditation and espionage. The American skepticism. Not everyone was impressed. Mainstream science largely dismissed Bentov's model. It was too speculative, too mystical. His ideas didn't fit neatly into controlled lab experiments. And because he was an independent inventor rather than a tenured professor, his credibility in academic circles was limited. But for ordinary people, seekers, meditators, and those who had experienced strange states they couldn't explain, Bentov's model was a revelation. It validated their experiences without requiring blind faith. It said, "You're not crazy. You're resonant." Kundalini without the snake. Perhaps Bentov's greatest contribution was reframing Kundalini. In the West, Kundalini was often described in dramatic, frightening terms: a coiled serpent, a dangerous fire, a mystical explosion. Stories abounded of people going mad or losing control after awakening. Bentov stripped away the superstition. He described Kundalini as a biological current, an oscillation system within the nervous system. When activated, it synchronizes the brain, heart, and spine into coherent resonance. No snake required. No mysticism needed. It was still mysterious, still awe-inspiring, but it was no longer terrifying. For Americans raised on fear of the unknown, this reframing mattered. It made awakening approachable. A man of humor and humanity. Despite his groundbreaking ideas, Bentov never took himself too seriously. He was known for his humor, his playfulness. Friends recall him joking about mystical experiences, even as he described them with precision. He saw himself not as a guru, but as a curious tinkerer exploring the biggest mystery of all, consciousness. This humility made his work accessible. He wasn't selling enlightenment. He wasn't building a cult. He was offering a model, a map that anyone could test for themselves. Legacy of a bridge builder. Bentov died tragically in 1979 in a plane crash. He was only 55 years old. His life ended just as his ideas were beginning to spread. But his influence lingered. His book continued to circulate in spiritual and scientific communities. His concepts seeded future studies on heart-brain coherence, neural oscillations, and altered states. Today, nearly 50 years later, his vision feels prophetic. Neuroscience is catching up, exploring how breath, meditation, and rhythm shape the brain. Psychologists are studying the benefits of silence and stillness.
Physicists are revisiting questions about consciousness and reality that Bentov posed decades ago. He built catheters and medical devices, but his greatest invention may have been something else. A bridge. A bridge between science and spirit, between America's obsession with proof and humanity's eternal search for meaning.
What if your body wasn't just flesh and bone? What if, beneath skin and muscle, you were a living instrument, a resonant chamber tuned to the frequencies of the universe itself? This was the heart of Itzhak Bentov's vision. He believed that consciousness was not some ghost in the machine, but a rhythm, a resonance that could be measured, understood, and, most importantly, awakened. And to explain it, he turned to the language he knew best: mechanics. The human body as a resonant chamber. Bentov often compared the body to a standing wave, like the vibration of a guitar string, or the resonance of a bell after it's struck. The heart beats with electrical pulses, measurable as EKG signals. The brain hums with frequencies, captured in EEG patterns. The cerebrospinal fluid moves rhythmically, like a tide washing up and down the spine. Individually, these rhythms are fascinating, but when they fall into sync, something extraordinary happens. The body becomes coherent. Like an orchestra tuning to the same key, the systems of the body begin to harmonize. Bentov believed this harmony is the gateway to higher states of awareness, not metaphorically, not symbolically, but literally, mechanically.
The feedback loop. Here's how Bentov described it. When you sit still, deeply still, your body begins to sway almost imperceptibly. This sway is not random. It's the pendulum effect, the natural oscillation of the human frame. That oscillation travels up the spine, creating waves in the cerebrospinal fluid. Those waves reach the ventricles of the brain, gently pulsing them, stimulating neural rhythms. As the brain vibrates, it interacts with the heart's electromagnetic field. The heart and brain begin to entrain, to fall into rhythm with each other. And when they do, a feedback loop forms. The heart's rhythm stabilizes the brain. The brain's rhythm deepens the body's oscillation. The oscillation strengthens the flow of cerebrospinal fluid. On and on it goes, like a self-playing instrument. The result? The left and right hemispheres of the brain begin to synchronize. Consciousness shifts. You start to feel less like a fragment and more like a whole. Resonance and the tuning fork. Bentov loved metaphors. One of his favorites was the tuning fork.
Strike one tuning fork, and another nearby fork will begin to vibrate in sympathy. Not because it was touched, but because the frequency carried through the air, activating resonance. The human body, he said, works the same way. When the internal rhythms become coherent, they resonate with frequencies beyond themselves. Consciousness expands, not because of imagination, but because resonance allows access to levels of awareness normally hidden. This is why meditation, breathwork, and prayer have similar effects across cultures. They quiet the noise, allowing the body to fall into resonance. And once resonance is achieved, the whole system begins to hum with coherence. Kundalini as mechanics. In Eastern traditions, Kundalini is described as a serpent coiled at the base of the spine, rising upward when awakened. To Western ears, it sounds mystical, even frightening. But Bentov reframed it. He argued that Kundalini is simply the biological current of this feedback system. When the oscillation in the body grows strong enough, the current rises through the spine, stimulating the brain, synchronizing hemispheres, and shifting consciousness into a non-local mode. It's not fantasy, it's mechanics. The serpent is an ancient metaphor for a spiral, the upward wave, the DNA helix, the galaxy's arms. Kundalini in Bentov model is the body tuning itself into spiral resonance, moving energy upward in a measurable rhythm. Cross-cultural mirrors. What's remarkable is how many cultures describe the same process in different language.
In Hinduism, it's the Sushumna channel, through which Kundalini rises. In Taoist internal alchemy, it's the microcosmic orbit, energy circulating along the spine and front of the body. In Christian mysticism, it's the fire of the Holy Spirit rising through the spine, flooding the crown with light. In Sufi practice, the swaying body, in zikir remembrance, entrains rhythm with the divine. Different words, different symbols, same mechanics. Bentov's genius was to say, these are not contradictory. They are cultural expressions of the same underlying oscillation, making it relatable. For Americans unfamiliar with Eastern metaphors, Bentov pointed to everyday experiences. A jazz musician in flow, swaying with the beat, feeling like the music is playing through him. A surfer riding a wave, body and board in perfect harmony with the ocean's rhythm. A runner in the zone, breathing synced to footsteps, mind dissolved into movement. These are all glimpses of resonance, moments when body, breath, and awareness align. In those moments, the internal dialogue fades, time distorts, presence sharpens. Bentov would say, this is Kundalini in miniature. Not a mystical event, but the body entering temporary coherence, the brain as instrument. Modern neuroscience now confirms much of what Bentov suggested.
When the hemispheres of the brain synchronize, people report states of unity and expanded awareness. Slow, rhythmic breathing increases cerebrospinal fluid flow, literally massaging the brain from below. Heart-brain coherence creates measurable electromagnetic fields that extend several feet outside the body. Bentov saw all of this decades earlier. He didn't have MRI scanners or advanced EEGs, but he trusted his observations. He wrote that the brain, when tuned by the body's oscillations, becomes like a musical instrument. And Kundalini? It is the force that strums it into harmony. natural, not exotic. One of Bentov's boldest claims was that full Kundalini awakening is not rare, it is natural. Every night, as we fall asleep, the brain passes through the same oscillations that can lead to expanded awareness. The difference is, we're usually unconscious when it happens. The challenge is not to create the rhythm, but to remain aware during it, to ride the swing of the pendulum instead of slipping into unconsciousness. This reframing is powerful. It removes the mystique of exclusivity. Awakening isn't for a spiritual elite. It's the birthright of every human body. Resistance and crisis. Of course, not all awakenings are smooth.
Bentov acknowledged that when people resist the natural oscillation, or try to force it prematurely, crises can occur. The back tenses, the mind panics, the sensations feel threatening. Fear amplifies the chaos. He compared it to tuning an instrument. Tighten the strings too much, and they snap. Leave them too loose, and they don't play. But tune them carefully, and music emerges. Kundalini is the same. It cannot be forced. It must be tuned, allowed, trusted. The music of coherence. So what happens when the body is fully tuned? Bentov described it as a state of profound harmony, thoughts quiet, the sense of separation dissolves, intuition sharpens, reality itself feels responsive, as if thoughts shape experience more quickly. It is not an escape from the world, but a deeper entry into it. The inner rhythm harmonizes with the outer. Life begins to feel like music, not random noise, but a composition. Mystics call it union. Scientists might call it coherence. Bentov called it mechanics. Everyday practices. Bentov insisted that no exotic techniques were required. The body already knows the rhythm. The key is to stop interrupting it. Sit still and notice the natural sway of your body. Breathe slowly, rhythmically, letting each breath brush the inside of your spine. Allow silence to deepen, not by forcing thoughts away, but by no longer feeding them. These simple acts begin to activate the feedback loop. Over time, the oscillation strengthens, the brain synchronizes, the music of coherence grows louder. America's blind spot. And yet, in America, such practices are undervalued. Schools teach memorization, not breathing. Workplaces reward output, not stillness. Silence is treated as awkward, not sacred. Bentov warned that this cultural bias keeps people disconnected from their natural rhythm. By ignoring silence, by mistrusting the body's signals, Americans cut themselves off from their own birthright. The irony is that the same society obsessed with music, sports, and performance already understands rhythm and resonance intuitively, but it fails to recognize that the greatest instrument is the body itself.
Closing of Part 3. So here is Bentov's revelation. Your body is not just biology. It is an instrument of consciousness. The heart is the drummer. The brain is the strings. The spine is the resonant chamber.
The breath is the bow that plays them all, and Kundalini is the force that tunes the instrument into harmony. Bentov showed us that awakening is not mystical fireworks. It is resonance, it is rhythm, it is mechanics. But of course, once an instrument is tuned, there is always the risk of dissonance. What happens when the rhythm is resisted? When fear and misunderstanding twist the natural process into crisis? That is where we go next. Cliffhanger for Part 4. Why do so many fear the serpent? Why do awakenings sometimes turn into breakdowns? And how did Bentov explain the difference between harmony and chaos in the human instrument?
Why is it that the very word Kundalini makes some people shiver? Across cultures, the serpent rising in the spine has been feared, worshipped, and demonized in equal measure. In the East, it is revered as divine power. In the West, it is often whispered about like a spiritual danger, a force that can drive the unprepared to madness. But what if the fear itself is the problem? What if the crises people experience during awakening are not proof that the energy is dangerous, but proof that we have misunderstood it? Bentov believed exactly that. And in this part, we will explore the shadow side of awakening, not to frighten, but to illuminate. Because only when we understand the roots of fear can we begin to move beyond it. The serpent archetype. Let's begin with the symbol itself, the serpent. From Genesis to the Vedas, the snake has carried enormous weight in human imagination. It sheds its skin, a symbol of renewal. It slithers in silence, a symbol of hidden knowledge. It strikes with venom, a symbol of danger. In ancient India, Kundalini was described as a coiled serpent at the base of the spine. The metaphor was not chosen randomly. The spiral shape mirrors the DNA helix, the coiling of galaxies, the upward motion of energy. The serpent was a symbol of life force in motion. From Shakti to Chi, from the Holy Spirit to Asha, what happens when we weave their symbols together? Could it be that every tradition has been pointing to the same hidden current all along?
But when this imagery traveled west, it collided with biblical associations of the snake as tempter, deceiver, embodiment of sin. Over centuries, the Western subconscious absorbed a deep suspicion. Serpent equals danger. So when Western seekers first encountered the idea of Kundalini in the 20th century, many heard not empowerment, but warning. Spiritual emergencies. Indeed, there are stories, dramatic, frightening stories, of people who attempted to awaken Kundalini and suffered. Insomnia, panic attacks, sudden visions they couldn't control. Periods of disorientation, as if reality itself was collapsing. Psychologists later called these spiritual emergencies. Some cultures treated them as madness. Some spiritual teachers called them signs of progress. But Bentov offered a different lens: mechanics. He believed the crises were not caused by Kundalini itself, but by resistance, fear, or forced practice. When the body's instrument is tuned too quickly or too forcefully, the strings snap. The energy is intelligent, he said, but the mind panics. And it is the panic, the fight against the process, that creates chaos. America's fear of losing control. To understand why these crises feel so frightening, we must consider culture. America is built on the myth of control. Control your time, your career, your family, your image. Advertisements promise control over your body, your health, your future. To lose control, even for a moment, feels like failure. Kundalini awakening, by contrast, is about surrender. The energy moves on its own rhythm, not yours. The spine sways, the breath deepens, the inner dialogue dissolves. For someone conditioned to grip every moment, this feels like death. The irony is that the very act of resisting is what causes suffering. If the body is an instrument, Americans are constantly yanking at the strings, terrified of what will happen if they just let the music play. Bentov's instrument metaphor. Bentov compared it to tuning a violin. If you tighten the strings too much, they snap. If you leave them too loose, the sound is dull. But if you listen carefully, adjusting with patience, the instrument sings. The same is true of Kundalini. Forced practices, intense breathing, or ego-driven striving can over-tighten the system. The result? Headaches, insomnia, anxiety. On the other hand, neglecting the body's natural rhythms leaves the strings slack, never producing resonance. The art is in listening, trusting, adjusting gently. Fear as amplifier. Bentov observed that fear acts like static in the system. When the oscillation begins, a buzzing in the hands, a warmth in the spine, a pressure in the forehead, the mind leaps in. What is this? Am I dying? Am I losing control? The body tenses, the breath shortens. The oscillation, instead of flowing smoothly, crashes against resistance. The feedback loop turns chaotic. The person spirals into crisis. But if the same sensations are met with calm, with curiosity, with trust, the system self-regulates. The oscillation finds its balance. The hum becomes music. Fear is the difference between crisis and awakening. Case stories of crisis. Consider the story of a young American man in the 1970s. He experimented with intense breath work, hoping to force Kundalini awake. Within weeks, he experienced racing thoughts, uncontrollable shaking, terrifying visions. He was hospitalized, diagnosed with psychosis. Or a woman who, after a weekend meditation retreat, returned home unable to sleep, her body trembling with energy. Doctors prescribed tranquilizers. She felt she was going insane. Bentov would argue these were not cases of mystical danger, but of misunderstanding. The instrument was being overtuned. The inner dialogue was panicking. With guidance, patience, and trust, the same processes could have become gateways instead of prisons. Chinamsta, the ego, cut away. To understand this better, let's revisit one of the most shocking figures in Hindu Tantra, Chinamsta, the goddess who holds her severed head in her hand, 3 streams of blood flowing to nourish herself and her attendants. At first glance, it is grotesque, but symbolically, it is profound. The cutting away of the head represents the surrender of ego, the silencing of internal dialogue. The bloodstreams symbolize life force feeding self and others. For Bentov, this image captures the paradox of Kundalini crises. The fear comes from ego clinging to control. The liberation comes when the ego is willing to let go, to cut its own head, so to speak, and trust the deeper rhythm. What feels like death is actually nourishment. What feels like madness
is actually surrender.
Ramana Maharshi and Effortless Awakening. Contrast this with the story of Ramana Maharshi, the Indian sage. At age 16, he spontaneously experienced what felt like death. He lay down, convinced he was dying, but instead of panicking, he surrendered. His consciousness expanded beyond body and mind. When he rose, he was transformed. For Ramana, there was no crisis because there was no resistance. His ego dissolved willingly, and what remained was awareness itself. Bentov pointed to such stories as proof. It is not the energy that harms, it is the resistance that creates suffering. The cultural shadow. But why does America, in particular, struggle so deeply with surrender? Because the cultural myth is built on self-assertion. From the frontier to Wall Street, from Hollywood to Silicon Valley, the American dream celebrates the self who conquers, who builds, who bends the world to their will. Kundalini whispers a different dream: surrender, rhythm, harmony. These values sound un-American, even subversive. No wonder awakening is feared. It threatens the cultural myth of control. And yet, ironically, it is exactly what America needs, a reminder that freedom is not found in domination, but in release. Bentov's warning. Bentov warned that without proper understanding, Kundalini would be misinterpreted in the West as pathology. Doctors would medicate it, psychologists would diagnose it, and seekers would fear it. And he was right. To this day, many who experience awakening symptoms are told they are mentally ill. Their subtle oscillations are pathologized, their hum of resonance suppressed. This is the cultural shadow, a refusal to acknowledge the intelligence of the body's instrument toward a mature understanding. So how do we move beyond fear? Bentov suggested 3 principles. Rhythm, not force. Create conditions, breath, stillness, silence, and let the energy rise naturally. Trust, not fear. Meet sensations with curiosity, not panic. Trust the intelligence of the system. Integration, not escape. Awakening is not about leaving the world, but about embodying coherence within it.
With these principles, crises become transitions. Fear becomes fuel. The serpent becomes a guide, not a threat. Closing. So why is Kundalini feared? Because the serpent has always carried the weight of our projections. Because cultures of control panic when surrender arrives. Because fear amplifies what could have been harmony. But Bentov's model reveals the truth. The crises are not proof of danger. They are proof of misunderstanding. When the instrument is tuned with patience, when the ego allows its grip to loosen, the serpent does not destroy, it awakens. And that brings us to the next step. If Kundalini crises reveal our fear of power, then what do the world's traditions, from India to Taoism to Sufi mysticism, even to the Yoruba of West Africa, teach us about embracing it? What symbols, myths, and practices point us toward integration rather than chaos? That is where we go in Part 5. Cliffhanger for Part 5. Across the world, cultures whispered the same pattern: in different tongues.
Across the planet, across centuries, across religions and philosophies, humanity has whispered of the same current, a hidden force within the body, a power rising, a fire, a serpent, a breath, a spirit. Every culture gave it a different name. Every tradition wrapped it in its own symbols. But the pattern remained. Energy ascends. Identity dissolves. Awareness expands. Itzhak Bentov called it mechanics. The ancients called it mystery. And here, in the meeting of their languages, we begin to glimpse something universal. The Hindu current. Shakti rising. In the Indian tradition, Kundalini is described as Shakti, the primordial energy of creation. Coiled at the base of the spine, she rises through the Sushumna channel, piercing chakras like lotuses opening until she merges with Shiva at the crown. To the Western mind, these images sound poetic, even fantastical, but they are maps of inner experience. The serpent coil represents the spiral movement of energy. The chakras represent junctions of nerves and awareness. The union of Shakti and Shiva symbolizes the integration of body and consciousness.
Bentov saw this not as superstition, but as symbolic engineering. The yogis, he believed, were describing the same oscillations he measured mechanically. Where they spoke of Shakti, he spoke of resonance. Where they spoke of chakras, he saw feedback loops of the nervous system. 2 languages, 1 pattern. Daoist alchemy, the microcosmic orbit. Travel east to China and we find Taoist internal alchemy. Practitioners spoke of circulating qi through the microcosmic orbit, up the spine, the Du channel, down the front, the Ren channel, in a continuous loop. They described sensations of warmth rising, energy spiraling, light flooding the head. The purpose was not escape from the body, but nourishment of it. The inner elixir, the refinement of energy into spirit. Bentov read these accounts and recognized the same mechanics. The circulation of qi mirrored the oscillation of cerebrospinal fluid. The loop of energy mirrored the feedback circuit of heart, brain, and spine. Once again, different language, same resonance.
The Christian flame. Even within Christianity, often considered far removed from yogic imagery, echoes appear. Mystics wrote of the fire of the Holy Spirit, rising within, flooding the crown with tongues of flame. Saints spoke of ecstatic union, where the body trembled, visions came, and the sense of self dissolved into God. The Book of Acts describes disciples shaken by rushing wind, tongues aflame, filled with spirit. Medieval mystics described burning hearts, luminous crowns, divine ecstasy. To Bentov, these were not delusions. They were cultural expressions of the same oscillation. Where yogis saw serpents, Christians saw fire. Where Hindus spoke of chakras, Christians spoke of gifts of the spirit. The pattern was universal. The Sufi sway. In Islamic mysticism, the Sufis developed zikir, remembrance of God through rhythmic chanting and swaying.
Entire gatherings move together, bodies oscillating gently, breath deepening, minds dissolving into rhythm. Observers often describe trance-like states, visions, tears of ecstasy. Practitioners speak of losing themselves, of being carried by a current beyond thought.
Bentov smiled at these descriptions. He saw the sway, the breath, the oscillation, mechanics again. The same pendulum, the same resonance, activated by rhythm. Yoruba Asha, the power to make it happen. Cross the ocean to West Africa, and we encounter the Yoruba concept of Asha. Asha is the life force that flows through all things. But it is more than energy. It is also command, the power to shape reality through word, rhythm, and alignment. Priests and priestesses awaken Asha through drumming, dancing, chanting. The body begins to vibrate, the community resonates together, and the divine presence is invoked. Bentov would recognize the mechanics. Rhythm creating coherence, coherence awakening power. Asha is resonance embodied in culture. The American blind spot. So why, if the pattern is universal, has American culture struggled to embrace it? Because America inherited a worldview split between materialism and religion. On one side, the scientific establishment dismissed mystical states as superstition. On the other, religious traditions often demonized them as dangerous or demonic. The result? Silence. No mainstream framework for interpreting resonance experiences.
No cultural permission to trust the hum in the spine, the warmth in the chest, the visions behind closed eyes. Instead, Americans were taught to suppress, medicate, or fear. Bentov's model was radical precisely because it offered permission. It said, you are not crazy. You are not sinful. You are resonant. Symbols as bridges. One of Bentov's gifts was to see symbols not as decorations, but as bridges. The serpent coil equals spiral resonance. The lotus opening equals nervous system junctions awakening. The fire equals oscillation intensifying into awareness. The sway equals pendulum mechanics of the body. The drumbeat equals entrainment of the heart and brain. By translating symbols into mechanics, he made them accessible to the modern rational mind. And yet, he never stripped away their poetry. He recognized that symbols carry emotional power. They move the heart in ways equations cannot.
Thus, symbols and mechanics together form the complete map. Guru Jagat, a modern cautionary tale. But symbols can also mislead. In the modern West, we find figures like Guru Jagat, a charismatic teacher of Kundalini yoga. She attracted thousands, built institutes, mixed ancient practices with modern branding. Her followers described deep transformations, but her defense of controversial teachers and her dabbling in conspiracy theories revealed the shadow side of modern spirituality. Charisma without coherence, performance without depth. Her sudden death at 41 shocked her community. For some, it revealed how fragile spiritual authority can be in a culture hungry for leaders but untrained in discernment. Bentov's model provides a caution.
External teachers can guide, but the real awakening is internal. Without understanding mechanics, seekers risk projecting power outward, mistaking personality for resonance. Symbols misused, symbols redeemed. When symbols are detached from mechanics, they can become dangerous. The serpent becomes demon. The fire becomes hysteria. The rhythm becomes obsession.
But when symbols are reconnected to mechanics, they regain their truth. They become teaching tools, guides to the body's own intelligence. Bentov's genius was not to abolish symbols, but to redeem them, to show how serpent, flame, and rhythm all point to the same oscillation, the same feedback loop, the same natural resonance. America's hidden symbols, even within American culture, the echoes are there. The jazz musician speaking of being possessed by the groove. The athlete describing the zone as if another force took over. The Pentecostal worshiper trembling in spirit. The poet speaking of inspiration as if breathed in by something larger. All these are glimpses of resonance. The symbols differ, groove, spirit, breath, but the mechanics remain. The challenge for America is to recognize them not as separate, but as facets of the same universal current. Integration, from chaos to coherence. So what do we do with these echoes?
Bentov urged integration. Don't chase exotic symbols. Don't cling to one cultural expression. See the unity behind them. Use mechanics to understand, and symbols to feel. The serpent teaches surrender. The fire teaches passion. The drum teaches rhythm. The lotus teaches unfolding. The cross teaches transcendence. The orbit teaches circulation. Together, they form a complete language of awakening, one that speaks to the body, the heart, and the mind. Closing of Part 5. So here we stand, at the crossroads of cultures. Hindu Shakti, Taoist Chi, Christian fire, Sufi sway, Yoruba Asha, American groove, all whispering the same truth. The body is an instrument. Consciousness is resonance. Awakening is natural. Bentov gave us the mechanics. The ancients gave us the symbols. Together, they form a bridge strong enough to carry us beyond fear, beyond division, into a universal understanding of the human instrument.
But if this current is universal, if awakening is natural, then why is it so often blocked? Why do stress, distraction, and fear silence the rhythm? That question leads us into the final part of Bentov's model, the return to rhythm. Cliffhanger for Part 6. What happens when we reclaim the rhythm America has forgotten? What practices return us to coherence? And what does it mean to live, not just glimpse, in the hum of awakening?
What if awakening wasn't a distant goal hidden in monasteries or locked behind secret initiations? What if it was something your body has been trying to do your entire life? Itzhak Bentov believed exactly that. He argued that Kundalini awakening is not rare, not exotic, not reserved for spiritual elites. It is natural, It is built into the design of the human body. The tragedy is not that awakening is unreachable. The tragedy is that we have forgotten the rhythm that makes it possible. And now, as stress, distraction, and fear dominate modern culture, the return to rhythm has become more than a spiritual quest. It has become a survival skill, a way to remember who we truly are. The forgotten rhythm. Bentov described the human body as a pendulum, swaying with subtle oscillations. The sway is always there. The feedback loops of heart, brain, and spine are always humming. The cerebral spinal fluid is always pulsing. But modern life drowns it out. The noise of internal dialogue, the pressure of productivity, the constant buzz of media, all these overlay the body's natural music.
The result is disconnection, anxiety, exhaustion, the sense that something is missing, though we cannot name it. What is missing is not outside us. It is within us. It is the rhythm of coherence, the hum of awakening. Stillness as access. So how do we return? Bentov insisted the answer was not exotic. It was simple. Stillness. Stillness is not passive. It is active alignment. When the body becomes still, the sway emerges. When the breath slows, the oscillation strengthens. When the mind quiets, the feedback loop begins to harmonize. This is why meditation works, why prayer calms, why silence heals. They are not abstract rituals. They are invitations to the body's natural rhythm. And when that rhythm awakens, something extraordinary happens. The sense of separation dissolves. The chatter fades. Presence sharpens. You remember who you are. Practices for rhythm. Bentov outlined practical steps anyone could take. Breath as bow. Breathe slowly and rhythmically. Imagine the breath brushing the inside of your spine. Feel it rise to the crown, then pour back down. This is not imagination. It is entrainment. The breath is the bow that plays the instrument of the body.
Stillness as stage. Sit quietly. Notice the subtle sway of your body like a pendulum. Don't force it. Let it happen. That sway sends waves through the spine, activating the oscillation. Silence as tuner. When thoughts arise, don't chase them. Let them pass like ripples on a pond. The less static you add, the clearer the signal becomes. Walking as integration. Sync your steps with your breath. Walk not to arrive, but to return, to yourself, to rhythm. Each step becomes a beat, each breath a chord. Listening as anchor. Pay attention to sensations, the hum in your chest, the warmth in your hands, the pressure in your forehead. They are signals, not accidents. They are your system learning to speak again. None of these require leaving home, joining a monastery, or adopting foreign rituals. They are universal. They are human.
The American Challenge. And yet, for Americans, these simple acts may be the hardest. Because America is built on movement, hustle, noise, endless consumption, to sit still, to breathe slowly, to be silent, these feel almost rebellious. Schools teach children to memorize facts, but not to listen to their own breath. Workplaces reward busyness, but not coherence. Even spirituality is often packaged as performance. Loud worship, dramatic retreats, quick-fix promises. Bentov warned that until America values stillness, it will remain cut off from its own birthright. The body's rhythm is not a luxury. It is the foundation of sanity. Heraclitus and the flow. Bentov often quoted the Greek philosopher Heraclitus. You cannot step into the same river twice. Everything flows. The river, the breath, the pendulum of consciousness. Awakening is not about freezing life into perfection. It is about flowing with the rhythm, trusting the current. To live in rhythm is to accept impermanence, to ride the oscillation between presence and absence, between matter and non-matter. It is to remember that you are both wave and particle, both body and awareness. This is not mystical poetry. It is mechanics, resonance, flow. So what does it look like to live in rhythm?
It is the jazz musician in flow, eyes closed, body swaying, channeling music larger than himself. It is the runner in the zone, breath synced with stride, awareness dissolved into movement. It is the parent rocking a child to sleep, heartbeats sinking, both drifting into calm. It is the quiet moment at night, when the chatter finally fades and you feel a hum in your chest that is both yours and not yours. Living in rhythm is not escape, it is embodiment. It is the integration of the mystical into the ordinary. Obstacles to awakening. Of course, obstacles remain. Fear. The mind panics when control dissolves. Ego. The self resists surrender, clinging to its story. Culture. Society rewards noise, not silence. Forcing. Impatience leads to crisis, overtuning the instrument. Bentov's answer was always the same: trust the rhythm. The energy is intelligent, the body is designed for it. The only danger is resistance.
The birthright. Perhaps Bentov's most radical claim is that awakening is not an achievement. It is our default setting. We are designed to live in Kundalini consciousness. Children glimpse it in their natural flow. Artists touch it in inspiration. Mystics live in it permanently. But for the average adult, stress and conditioning block the rhythm. We forget. We numb. We chase substitutes, consumption, distraction, validation. The path back is not about becoming someone new. It is about remembering who we were before the noise. The universe remembering itself. Bentov believed consciousness is holographic. We are not separate from the universe. We are the universe, vibrating in human shape. When the rhythm awakens, we remember this. We stop being just a person searching for meaning. We become meaning itself, the universe remembering its own music. This is why awakening feels like coming home, not to a place, but to a state of coherence that was always there. A message for America today.
It means the culture of noise must rediscover silence. The obsession with control must rediscover surrender. The addiction to consumption must rediscover rhythm. Awakening is not about abandoning the American dream. It is about deepening it. True freedom is not the ability to buy more or hustle harder. True freedom is the ability to live in rhythm with your own body, your own breath, your own awareness. Bentov's model offers America a new frontier, not of land or technology, but of consciousness. Closing of Part 6. So here we end where Bentov always wanted us to arrive, in rhythm. Not in fear of serpents, not in worship of symbols, not in endless analysis, but in the simple hum of coherence, the body tuned like an instrument, the mind quiet enough to hear the music of being. Awakening is not rare, it is natural, it is your birthright. The only question left is, will you listen? Because when the pendulum of your consciousness swings in harmony, you stop being just a person in the universe. You become the universe, remembering itself through you.